Hello and welcome to another episode of EdTransformed. EdTransformed is brought to you by School of the Future International Academy, in short, SOFIA. SOFIA is a non-profit, non-governmental organization which supports educational institutions, school leaders and educators in their effort to improve their knowledge and skills. We feel that this way we contribute to the creation of equal opportunities for every student around the world. This is a series of podcasts where we try to start discussions on various topics that interest the modern educational community. By exchanging approaches and ideas, we try to enrich the educational landscape and better serve students everywhere. Today, we are honored to have Julie Foss with us. She did the coordination of the Teachers and Students Voice Roundtable for Bridge the Gap 2024, which was dedicated to AI in education. Julie, I will give you the floor to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Natasha. I'm honored to be here. I really appreciate you having me. Yes, I am a consultant. I specialize in helping educational leaders and teams to get unstuck in their AI adoption journeys. I bring over 20 years of experience as an educator and school leader and change coach and consultant. The last 2 of those years really being spent helping school communities to develop AI literacy and the guidelines and frameworks they need to operationalize it. I find that school teams get stuck in one of 4 areas. So sometimes they get stuck at the starting line. They need help getting started, either building AI literacy or just having enough AI literacy in the organizations to know where to start. Sometimes they get stuck in AI governance. So they're all, folks are using all these new tools, but may not be able to recognize risk or, help mitigate or respond to it and build the processes to do that. Sometimes they get stuck in implementation. So people have done a wonderful job of creating policies and guidelines, but translating it to the lived experience of people in school buildings is a challenge. And then other times, I think people get stuck in change leadership, scenarios, right, where they've done a great job of building AI literacy, but it's not necessarily connected to their strategic goals and priorities as an organization. So they're meeting resistance, or their people are having trouble seeing how it's connected to everything else they're doing. So I work with folks to, build understanding around where they're stuck, why they're stuck, and then, help them with key inflection points so they can continue on their AI adoption journey.
Perfect. Thank you. You are absolutely right. These are the various stages where we also see people finding it hard to incorporate and integrate AI into their systems. Let's take each one of them a little bit separately and discuss each different situation. So school leaders in our network and generally often ask how to begin meaningful AI integration. Where should they start?
So I love that question, and I definitely have a few places that I can see people have had success in getting started. But I think generally the caveat I would add to that question is I think oftentimes we focus on where to start instead of focusing on start. And so I would really encourage folks to not get stuck in terms of where, just to get started. And I'll offer a few suggestions of where to do that. But I think there's urgency around making sure people are invested in this conversation. That said, I think there are a couple of places where it's a good idea to get started. One, really making visible your current state. So whether that's a survey or just conversations and focus groups, but really having some understanding around, what are the AI systems that people are using? How are they using AI? What are they using it for? What kinds of problems are they trying to solve with AI? And so I would start there and just really have an understanding of what influence generative AI is playing sort of in your school. I think another great place to start is experimentation and playing. So really just starting to use free tools and especially foundational models like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini, and really starting to understand, well, what are they good at and what are they not so good at? Where am I finding success when I use them? Where am I really truly solving problems when I use these models, and really just kind of experimenting and start to notice and wonder as you do. And then I think the other thing that I think is really important is dialogue. This is, I think, something that can either bring out our humanity or not. And so starting from a place of connection and dialogue and understanding like what are people worried about, what are they excited about, what are they curious about, what do they feel like they need to learn relative to generative AI, and just starting some of those conversations. I think as school leaders, sometimes we think we need to have all the answers, but I really think we need to be helping people generate the right questions. So those are some places I would recommend we get started.
Excellent, thank you. You have spoken about this idea of vehicles of practice, calibration, examination, and reimagination. How can school leaders use this to align day-to-day operations with their school's core values that they have established for years, maybe, while building AI literacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think starting with core values can be a great grounding exercise, right? Those are sort of our anchors and roadmaps in our work, and I think there are probably documents that are aligned to those as well. But it's a great exercise in sort of grounding us and translating to practice. So if collaboration, for example, is a core value of your institution, really starting to unpack, okay, well, what does collaboration, how does that look differently with generative AI, right? And so maybe collaboration and your definition of collaboration up until this point has included just collaboration among people. And so maybe it needs to expand to include people and generative AI systems. And so what does that look like? Are there best practices around that we can either learn from other organizations, or in our experimentation, have we found these are the most effective? Is there guidance people need in order to be able to do that well? And so really starting to unpack, what does that look like in leadership decisions? What does that look like in our operations? What does that look like in teaching and learning? And so really starting to unpack those core values with generative AI as a lens, I think is a really good place to start. In terms of the examination piece, really starting with documents that guide your organization. So your strategic plan, your learning model, your any kind of institutional documents that are really kind of framing your organization and the work that you do and the decision making that happens, and starting to examine them for durability. So what holds up in a generative AI augmented world and what needs some redefinition. So same thing, if you look at strategic plans and you look at, even instructional practices, right? You may have high leverage instructional practices that you use. As you dig deeper into those, maybe the actual practice holds up, but maybe how you implement it does not, right? If you're using specific tools, like, do you know how data is being used in those tools? Has that changed because now it's augmented with AI? So do you need to have that conversation? Or has access changed all of a sudden? And now you're not just looking at if people can access the tools like on Wi-Fi, but you're also thinking about, okay, what's the skill level of the teacher that's using that? Are people using it to learn more deeply, or are people just using it to offload tasks that can be formerly done by humans and are now able to be done by AI? So really kind of thinking about some of those things as you examine the core documents that you use, the core practices that you have, and the core tools that you're using, I think is really important. And then finally, reimagination. Really, is there anything that really needs to be thought through entirely? Academic integrity is something that comes up all the time with schools. And so are there, if your assessments are not sort of withstanding AI or can be done by AI, if you can put your entire assessment into AI or into a generative AI tool and it can be completed, well, like, does that need to be reimagined in terms of, what we're asking so that students are truly able to handle some of that lift? So I think those are the kinds of things and the kinds of conversations that need to be happening in schools.
Speaking a little bit about the teachers' capacity to use AI in their day-to-day work, we see that a lot of schools have started already incorporating AI literacy into their professional development programs. But we wanted your opinion on how can leaders move from one-off PD session to a more long-term embedded practice that aligns with their strategic goals, but also covers the needs of teachers, no matter where they are on the ease with which they use the tools?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. I think sometimes our schema around professional learning is twofold. One is that it's something that happens to us 3 times a year. And so I would actually love to just retire that term entirely and just think about, if we're going to create a culture of learning in our organization, where can people learn? Well, they can learn in conversations with colleagues. They can learn in faculty meetings. They can learn in the work that they're doing in classroom and reflection, right? During, reflection meetings are post-observation meetings, right? They can, so there are just so many opportunities for us to build learning into our interactions. And I think that is sort of where we need to go and think about, professional learning. So, all those are opportunities in coaching conversations with instructional coaches, right? Or technology integration coaches. So I would love to see people sort of think through an inquiry approach to professional learning and really kind of setting out the year, what are the questions that are going to guide our learning this year? And then seeing all of those interactions as opportunities to learn and exchange ideas. So I think everybody has something to contribute to those learning conversations, and everybody has something to learn. So really kind of setting that, that kind of, I guess, mindset around professional learning, and then asking people to reflect on that and really creating spaces for people to share and exchange learning, and then using that to inform any kind of, obviously there are sort of compliance-based things. There are things that every organization needs its people to know, but having those be sort of the micro learning, and then to say, okay, now how can you take this micro learning that we've just discussed and infuse your experience and what you've learned in, from a practical perspective, and how can that be sort of our collective learning as an organization? So I think it's just a matter of reframing. I don't know if that's concrete enough, but I do really think that it's just a matter of sort of reframing learning as something that we're all responsible for, that we are all invested in, and that we all contribute to. And then ultimately what's going to come out of that is, a better experience for our kids, a better experience for us in terms of our learning journey, rather than just this thing that we have to sit through 3 times a year and get.
This is so true. This is so very true. However, not everybody has the right mindset. I'm not judgmental towards people who don't want to integrate one more tool in their teaching practices, because teachers have been bombarded the last decade with technology and innovation, and literally every semester people can have one more thing to learn and incorporate into their work. So I can understand and I feel how tired somebody can be every time they need to make changes in the tools they are using. So I see why they would be reluctant and resistant into doing more professional development and into learning more about tools. However, what is the mindset of an educator that resists this frustration of the overload of information and new tools?
Sure. Well, I think, the most important thing is, I totally echo what you just said. I remember walking into an office of one of my teachers, and she had this huge file cabinet, and I asked her what was in the file cabinet. And she said, this is all the things that, in the last 10 years of me being a teacher, that I have collected. And so anytime I find I use the new, whatever we're supposed to do that year, and anytime it doesn't work, I just go back into my file cabinet and pull out something from previous 10 years that I use. So I think, that's all in teachers' brains. There's so many resources and so many, pedagogies and things like that. So I used to say to my teachers, like, anytime something new came down, it's like, what can we all like really get excited about this? Like, what about this is at its core is really good for kids and really something that resonates and jives with what we know about good pedagogy. Okay. And then what are the pieces that are, outside of that we need to either kind of do or that are not really outside of that don't really matter in terms of us connecting this with kids. And it's just a way to sort of like ground people in, like, what hasn't changed? Okay, what pieces have? And do we recognize that we need to kind of do something about it and learn in order to make happen? And then what's the piece that, we can kind of let go of? The other thing I think we do is, I remember as a teacher when Power School first came out, I kept an electronic grade book and I kept a paper grade book. So I was doubling my workload rather than sort of trusting that, I had this new thing so I could let go of something else. So I think when we think about new things, really asking people, okay, this is a new thing. And just like you'd want your doctor to be on top of like most recent and up-to-date research and most recent and up-to-date technology, you as an educator is responsible for the well-being and the learning of students. You want to be up to date on what's going on, right? Everybody can kind of get behind that. But then what can you let go of as you make room for this new learning? So I think that's the role of school leaders now, to really help people think through that. So I think that's a really key thing. I think the other thing is there's so little research at this point. We're still sort of learning how AI is going to impact students. And I think showing just a tremendous amount of curiosity and flexibility is something, and vulnerability those are going to be key mindsets that teachers sort of have to embrace, but not outsourcing their agency to take what they learn and what they notice as practitioners, as students are using and incorporating generative AI, or as they are doing that in their classroom, and then really saying, hey, here's what I notice and here's what I learn, and moving that forward so that we can learn from the experience of practitioners in the classroom. So I think that agency piece is really, really important, and the communication around what they're learning is also really important. And so to the extent that educational leaders can curate that and really ask for that input and make sure it gets surfaced, I think that will be really important. And then I think the last thing is really things like collaboration and being persistent and even being dynamic. Like I think things change so rapidly. So really even thinking about, processes that we put in place, like strategic plans and curriculum and things like that. How can we sort of design those things as sprints and really kind of monitor what's happening in 12-week and 18-week windows, and so that we are flexible in our programming and in our planning and are responsive as things change without necessarily having to shift everything. So I think that's going to be something that is going to be important for school leaders to think about too.
Great. Many educators fear that AI is only about automation and not improvement, and that they don't have the creative space to incorporate AI in a more creative way into their teaching. What can school leaders do in order to give them, with a little bit of control, this creative space to, as you said, learn as practitioners and report back to the community of what works, what doesn't work, what amazing things can do, but what failures can it cause, and what problems and challenges can it bring to the table? How can leaders create the space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a little bit of AI literacy, AI implementation, and AI governance all wrapped into this question. I was just talking with a colleague. We're planning a presentation for school leaders in July, and we were talking about demoing some examples. And one of the things we were talking about demoing was like data analysis and using AI, using ChatGPT for data analysis. And my colleague was saying, I kind of did this very complicated prompt, and I, uploaded the data, but it didn't give me what I wanted. It wasn't accurate. And we started talking about demoing that live and not getting an accurate result, and how, he wanted it to be kind of perfect, right? Before he showed it. And I talked about how important it was to model the messiness. I think that's really important for school leaders right now. We talked about designing that whole example and that whole use case around how to balance what AI can do and what humans can do. And so we talked about redesigning that whole demo to say, okay, instead of just having AI do the analysis, having, as a human group, we look through the data first and kind of pull up what we notice as within the data, right? And then to say, go to ChatGPT and say, okay, here's the data. Here's what we notice. What did we miss? What questions can we ask to deepen our analysis? And then it's not AI. We're not offloading that entire task to AI, right? We're saying, hey, here's what we did. Here's what we noticed. We want to actually make our analysis better. And then, ChatGPT was able to give us questions, and we went back into the data with those questions to really deepen our look at what we were, what we were finding. So again, that's a design conversation, right? If in terms of how we're using generative AI to help us do better work versus just do quicker work. So I think that's a really important thing. If we're feeding the conversation around automation, if we're offloading the task to AI. And so really kind of thinking about design, but then also being willing to model that as a school leader to say, hey, here's an example of how I think we can use this tool. It didn't work the first time. So that means I have to kind of go back and say, okay, why didn't it work? Well, did it not work because I trusted it? It's a language model and I trusted it to do a lot of math, right? Or did it not work because my prompt was off? Or did it not work because I didn't do the work I needed to do first, in order to get kind of the result I was looking for? So, and it's okay if it didn't work. Then there's a whole host of literacy entry points there to, okay, hallucination, to talking about prompting, to, right? And then there's an AI governance conversation in that, right? Am I using student data? If I'm using student data, what do I need to have in place in order to make sure that we're not, kind of violating any privacy concerns or whatever? So it was kind of a long-winded answer, but I think there's a lot to that question. And I think the modeling piece and the modeling the messiness and the, really kind of thinking about how we're designing our use of generative AI to address certain use cases is a really important kind of way to approach that.
Thank you. That was so useful. And this was a very interesting example. We have the tendency to feel, everybody, I think we have the tendency to feel that whichever AI tool is always right and that the answer we get is always correct and it's always useful. And it isn't. And the more we use it for more complex and complicated tasks, the clearer it becomes that it needs a little bit of handling in all these different stages you mentioned, like prompts, data, the actual resources we give the tool. So yeah, this is an important message. This is an important thing for people to have in mind, and this is where creativity is also hidden, if you see what I mean. My last question, and I feel this is a very important one because, as I said before, there's a plethora of tools and platforms and options out there. Based on your work with leadership teams, what are your go-to AI tools or platforms for common areas of school leadership tasks? Like strategic planning, communication, instructional coaching, professional learning, or whatever that may be, that school leaders need to have in mind in June 2025?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of foundational models. I just think there's a lot that can be done with even there. So I know everybody knows ChatGPT. I am a huge fan of Claude. I do have like GPTs that I've built for my business, and definitely think that schools could build those for kind of, there's a very regular cadence to what happens in schools. So I definitely think that GPTs, can be built to sort of navigate some of that. I use Consensus AI a lot for research and really have enjoyed that. And then the other one I think that has just a ton of utility for school leaders is Notebook LM. I think we're just scratching the surface for how that can be useful to educational organizations. And I think there's a lot from operational things like, housing SOPs and, helping orient folks to new buildings or new roles, all the way to, really thinking about professional learning or creating guidance documents or I just think there's sort of limitless, even communication plans and communication tools. They just actually announced yesterday that now you can share all of your notebooks. And I think that's a game changer for, thinking about communications differently. So those would be the ones that I would say are good starting points.
It's a very interesting list for all of us to go out there and start experimenting with. Julie, thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge, insights, and expertise with us and with our audience. It was a pleasure having you here, and we'll be collaborating in more and more in the future. I don't know if you have any last words, any last tips about school leaders and teachers out there regarding AI integration.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation and just, appreciate the opportunity to connect with school leaders and obviously with you, Natasha. I think just, really continue it's okay to be a learner and a leader at the same time. I know there's a lot of pressure. I have a deep empathy for school leaders right now, who are in that position, who feel like, they're learning at the same time they're being expected to lead and to provide guidance. So it's okay. It's okay no matter where you are. And if I can be of help in your journey along the way, would love to talk to you.
Perfect. Yes, of course, I will leave all the contact details and profiles of Julie on social media and the internet out there in the description of this podcast in each platform we use to publicize it. We encourage you to reach out to Julie with help and support with your AI integration in your school environment, and we will be very privileged to have her in a lot of our future programs, activities, and endeavors. Once again, Julie, thank you very much for everything. This is the end of this episode of EdTransformed. I'll see everybody in a next one. Thank you very much for listening.